And we're back to going to the JavaScript courses on Exercism. This is the 13th one. You'll find it here, Lasagna Master. It's an introduction to functions. You do it yourself. It's 5 tasks in total, and a bit of a longer introduction to functions in general. I'll just skip this part and leave it to you to read through it. Just pause the video if you're totally unfamiliar with functions. As you can see now on the left hand side, we don't have this usual basic file that Exercism has given us for the past exercises. Instead, we're going to create our code from scratch. And I think this is actually a good exercise for beginners. It's challenging somewhat, but you can make it. Let us start with task 1 right here. So at first we want to write a function, and we need the basic outline for that. It's always the same when you write a function. This one's called cooking status. If you scroll up, let me check it. Right here for function declaration, you will find this basic way to write it. So we need the keyword function and afterwards the function name. In this case, it was cooking status. Then the parentheses, which are meant for the parameters, and then the curly brackets, which will nest the actual code of the function. But be careful, in Exercism you also have to export your function for all of these tasks to work, so don't forget that. It says it right here in the comment, export the function. So add that keyword as well. Now let's go over the first task. We have 3 cases. If the timer shows 0, we want to have lasagna is done. If there's another minute, then 0, we need not done, please wait. And if there's no number given as a parameter, we need you forgot to set the timer. We can use a switch for that. But first let us define the parameter that we're going to use for our function. You could call it whatever you want. For example, remaining time or time remaining. It's just important that you have it inside of the parentheses right here after the function name. Let me call it time remaining. And we want to check if this time remaining is equal to one of the 3 cases that we've got as bullet points. So we need that right here for the switch to prove. And we have 3 cases, as I've said. Let me just write case 1, we want to break it afterwards, case 2. And we've got a default case. And now we'll just have to put all of the text on the right hand side into code that makes sense. So if the timer shows 0, therefore case 1 is 0, it should return lasagna is done. So just put it here, return. And then a string, so don't forget the quotation marks, lasagna is done. Second case, if the timer shows any other number. It makes sense to just use this as the default case. So I'll put it down here, we'll return another string, not done, please wait. And case 2, if the function is called without a timer value. And we already know a word that we can use for that. And this is undefined. We've had that in one of the previous exercises. If this is the case, for time remaining, we'll use this return. So you forgot to set the timer. And that should already be it. Let me check it if I haven't done any typos. We've passed all of these tests. So this is one way to solve it. Obviously, there are always many ways to do that. Let's jump ahead to task 2. We'll start off by yet again declaring a function. So we need the export keyword, then a function keyword, and afterwards the name. In this case, it's preparation time. Regular parentheses for the parameters and the curly brackets. Now let us go over the text. We want to check if we have enough time reserved, and it's about layers. So every layer takes a certain preparation time, and if the preparation time isn't given, we should assume that this time equals 2 minutes. So we have two cases for time given and time not given. So we're going to use two parameters, one for the time and one for this array, which we are going to call layers. It's also called layers in the example on the right hand side. And for every element that's inside of the layers array, we want to add 2 minutes by default, or we'll multiply that with our time. So we can use a return of layers.length in all of the cases, and then multiply it with time if it is given. So we need that as a second parameter in our function. But we already know that we have two cases, so let me make this the first case. So if and then a condition has to be true. In this case, time is equal or bigger than 0. We should return layers.length times time. And we've got the second case where time is not given. In this case, we want to just replace time with 2 minutes by default. So return layers.length times 2. And now let me add time as the second parameter before I forget it. You can see that on the right hand side, the first example right here, layers and 3 has two parameters. So here's the time given, and therefore 3 times the array length, which has 6 elements, would be 18. So this would be our if case. And the second, it doesn't have a time, so this is our else case. Therefore 6 times 2 minutes, it would result in 12. And we're good here for task 2. Let's jump to task 3. Now it's about the amount of noodles and sauce that we need. So we've got another array to check with our function. It's called quantities. And if we have these two, let's say, keywords of sauce or noodles, we want to add a specific amount. Let me read it more carefully here. And we want to return an object. And the keys, as I've said, are noodles and sauce. So these will be the properties of our object. To start off, we're going to create this new object. So we need a variable type, and we'll define a name for the object. It doesn't really matter what object name you use. But before I forget, let me add the layers parameter right here. To declare an object, you need these curly brackets, and as keys we use noodles. So here as properties, I will set them to 0, and for sauce as well. I'll separate both with a comma, so that's the way you declare and initialize objects. Let us use a for loop. We'll set the counter I to 0. And as long as it's smaller or equal to the size of the layer's length, we want to have this loop running. And it should, for every cycle, increment I the counter by 1. As I've said, layers, this is the name that I've used for our array that we're going to check. So it's layers.length. And again, we've got two cases. If layers at the index position of counter is equal to noodles, let's start there. We want to add, what was it, like 50 grams to it. So the object for now has noodles equals 0. But if we have noodles inside of our layers, we want to access the property, so object.noodles, and add 50 to it. The second case is for the source, so I use else if. The condition is almost the same, so layers at the index position, but this time it must be equal to source. And if that's the case, we want to access the property of the object, so object.source plus equal, and it was 0.2. And the result should be returned as an object, which is the last sentence on the right hand side in the task. So don't forget to return it after our for loop. It's still inside of the function, so place it correctly. And we're good here as well. For example, test 8, it has source 3 times and no noodles. So the if case is never true. Therefore noodles will remain a 0 in our object, but source is true 3 times. Therefore we have 0.6 for the source amount. Let's go ahead to task 4. Yet another function, add secret ingredient. So export function and a name. It's going to accept 2 arrays, so we need 2 parameters. Let me just add placeholders for now, so that I don't forget that. In the next sentence, it's explain what these parameters are. So the first is the list of a friend, and the second is my list. So I'll just use names like friends list and my list. And what we basically want to do is we want to check the last ingredient in our friends list and add it to our list. If we want to add something in the last position of an array, we need the push. So I'm going to add that. And the function should not return anything. So we don't need to return code line that we've used so far in every other function. But now we have to check where we want to push it. It's onto our list. So mylist.push. So whatever we push, it's going to be added to the last position of our array, which is called mylist. And we want to push the friends list, but only a specific element of it. And it's the last one. Therefore, we need to access the last index position of friends list. And we can do that by writing friends list.length, but be careful. Indexes, they start counting at 0, but the .length, it starts counting at 1. Therefore, friends.length wouldn't work. Instead, it has to be friends.length minus 1. So in the example on the right hand side, you can see that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 positions. Therefore it's a length of 4, but index goes from 0, 1, 2, and then 3. So we need index 3 and add it to our list. And as we have a length of 4, we need -1. But now everything should be fine. As I've said, we don't have to return anything. So this is the only code line that our function needs. I'll run the test. And hopefully I haven't made typos. No, I haven't. So it was alright. Let's check test 10. Here we have the last entry and we want to add it to our new list, and this is exactly what the function does. Let us check the final task. Scale the recipe. Basic outline is once again the same. Export function. Scale recipe is the name. We need 2 parameters, so I'll add my placeholders. And the bullet points explain what these parameters are. So it's the recipe, and the second one should be portions. And the recipe is an object. So we basically want to check the amounts of all of these properties. You can use a hint if you need to. So in this case we want to use a for loop again. I'll start off by creating a new recipe, as this is what we want to return. So we create a new object by doing this. Then we use the for loop. And usually for loops, you've seen it, they have a format like this. But in this case we want to use the for in loop. So that's written a little bit different. And maybe that's new for beginner. I don't recall that we've used it before in Exercism. But it's the way to write it. So for let key in a given parameter. In this case we'll use the recipe. And all of these keys are right here. Our properties, for example noodles, which is set to 200 in the example. We want to use our new object, the new recipe. And what we want to do is we want to find the keys in the old recipe. We've got the values attached to it, and then we want to multiply it with the portions. So this is, let's say, the pseudocode that we need. And now we want to check how we are going to do this. So at first we want to do it for every property. Therefore we need right here a counter for the index, and usually we've used I for that. But in the for loop we have now used key. So we'll have to replace that. We'll have to use it for recipe as well. Now we're good here, but let's check the portions. And you can see right here, the recipe has the amounts for 2 portions. So the original recipe is always for 2 people. Therefore we'll have to divide it by 2 to find out what amount we would need for 1 person. So if we wanted to create 7 portions, we would first have to divide the original recipe by 2 and then multiply by 7. If we just multiply it by 7, we would get 14 portions. So that's why we've used divided by 2 here for the portions. And afterwards we want to return our new recipe. But now it should be fine. I'll run the test. Are we good here? Let us check. I don't know, let's say test 14. So in this case it scales down. So we only have one portion that we want. Therefore all of these amounts in the original recipe are divided by 2 and then put inside of our new recipe object, and this is returned. So everything has now half the amount. Go with yourself, try to solve it yourself as always, and if you get stuck, refer to my walkthrough. I hope this video was helpful, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.